Ohio State has no momentum heading into this game against Georgia, the Peach Bowl, on December 31st. For them, it'll be a 5-week layoff between games because they did not play in the Big Ten Championship. For Georgia, it's a 4-week, and we're talking about 4 weeks to the date, like 28 days, 35 days for Ohio State, because Saturdays when happens to be when New Year's Eve is this year. So Ohio State's got a little bit extra time off. I think that takes away a little bit of momentum. I mean, that's a whole week. We're going to play. You got the injuries. You got the fact that they just didn't play well at the end of the season. I think Georgia's coming into this thing with a full head of steam compared to Ohio State that's coming into this thing where they're lucky to be there, to be quite frank. Now, I do think Ohio State's one of the 4 best teams in college football. So I think they got it right putting them in there. But they are lucky to be there, all right? They wouldn't be there if Caleb Williams and USC, Lincoln Riley, if they didn't lose that Friday night. 2 Fridays ago, if they didn't lose to Utah in the Pac-12 championship, Ohio State wouldn't be in the thing. So Ohio State did not control their own destiny. They were gifted a spot in the playoff, and that's fine. That's just what it is. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's just what it is. They don't have forward progress coming into this the way that Georgia does, the way they handled LSU. Just these games weren't in question for them. The Ohio State game, I'll get into that. Ryan Curley from Dog Post talking about Ohio State's momentum, or lack thereof, heading into the Peach Bowl semifinal game against the Georgia Bulldogs. Make sure you're checking out all the links down below. We have DAWGSTRUCTION. We have DAWGSTRUCTION signed by Keely Ringo. We have other things signed by Keely Ringo, all sorts of angles, and 16 by 20 prints of his pick 6 against Alabama in the national championship. Maybe there'll be another moment like that here in a few weeks. Nobody knows, but it'll be interesting to find out. Ohio State. Obviously, they're coming off of a big loss to Michigan where they got kind of pile-driven, if that's a word, by the Wolverines, 45-23. I've got Stroud's stats pulled up too to talk about his performances. 2 picks there. I believe both of them were in the second half. Week before that, Maryland. At Maryland. Like, that game was close. I think until the end of the fourth quarter, Ohio State got like a late touchdown to make it double digits. But that game was tied at one point against Maryland. And we're talking about November. Someone said, I can't remember who said it. I believe it was Brian Kelly. October's for pretenders, November's for contenders. That's not necessarily untrue. So you play 4 games in November. Let's put it this way. Let's look at what happened to Georgia in November and what happened to Ohio State in November. And then we'll also tack on the fact that Georgia played LSU in December. I'm going to count that in the November thing. Ohio State starts November. Oh, we'll go tit for tat. Ohio State tied with Northwestern, like going into halftime. I watched some of that game. They couldn't score. I know it was cold, but they couldn't score. But you're a team that plays in the cold a lot, man. It's different from Georgia playing in the cold. Stroud, 76 yards in that game on 38%. No touchdowns. Had 79 rushing yards, which is very uncharacteristic. He doesn't run that much. Had a long run. You couldn't score, and you're lucky you defended Northwestern. You're lucky Northwestern's really, really bad. I mean, you finished that game 21-7. So heading in November, it's like, well, what does Georgia do that day? They destroyed Tennessee. They go up 27-6 in the first half and then just sit on the ball in the second half. So, in my eyes, it is a 14-point game, but it felt like more than that. And I watched both of these games. I watched Ohio State play Northwestern. I watched Georgia play Tennessee. Georgia dominated the team that was ranked 1. And Northwestern is one of the worst teams in Power 5. And Ohio State had a hard time. Fast forward a week. Both teams take care of business. Georgia didn't play super well, but wins 45-19. Ohio State and Stroud throws 5 touchdowns. And Indiana, they beat Indiana 56-14. Okay, so November 12th, good for both teams. But that was really only Ohio State's only good game out of their 4 in November, because then they struggle against Maryland. Stroud only throws 1 touchdown. He only completes 60%. That's below average for him. They struggle to score. They don't struggle to score. They struggle to defend Maryland. Maryland put up 30 on them. It was a tight game the whole way through. Maryland's one of the worst teams. The Big Ten was fraudulent this year, and I've been saying that for a few weeks. This Big Ten was overrated this season because after Penn State, the drop-off is huge. Georgia, whack game against Kentucky. I think that this was their worst game in November. They didn't play well. The defense played really well, but Georgia's offense didn't play well. So it's like kind of the opposite. Ohio State's defense didn't play well against Maryland. So and then Georgia Tech, Georgia just kind of waltzed in there and slapped them 37-14. I was there, and Ohio State gets slapped by Michigan. So if you go game by game, it's like, well, Georgia looked good, and Georgia wins even if they look bad. Ohio State lost when they looked bad to Michigan. Is Michigan better than Ohio State? I think. I don't know. I'd love to see that game played in Ohio State. I mean, I know they lost. I'd like to see it played again, and I would like to watch Georgia national champion. So I wouldn't like to see that game played again. Let me catch myself there. But my point being, Ohio State in the middle of the season really dominated. They dominated October. They played really well in September outside of the Notre Dame game. Georgia struggled against Kent State and Missouri. Still won by double digits against Kent State. October 1st is when that was over. Then they fly through everybody. Kentucky's kind of man. Georgia Tech, call it man if you want. But then, what did Georgia do? They get to go to the SEC Championship, and they put up 50 points. And it was 35-7 at halftime. Ohio State is sitting at home watching that game, thankfully, because USC lost. So Ohio State doesn't have momentum. How is that going to affect this playoff run? Well, Alabama didn't have momentum heading into 2017's playoff. So maybe it won't affect them that much. I mean, they had just come off a loss to Auburn. So maybe it's not that crazy. Maybe I'm reading into it too much. But my point being is they've got more time off. I mean, I brought it up vaguely, but Jackson Smith and Jigba, Travion Henderson, those are two of their 3 or 4 best offensive players. And they're both not going to play. Marvin Harrison Jr., C.J. Stroud, and Mike Igbuka are all very good, but if you can't run against Georgia, you're not going to win. You're not going to win just airing the ball out against Georgia. You're not. So if you can't run against Georgia, you're going to have a hard time. Listen, I think Georgia's going to win this game. I think they're going to win this game by double digits. I do think it's a challenge. Stroud and this offense can score, and they can score in a hurry. I think it's a better version of what Tennessee does in the way that they just run and gun down the field, because I think Stroud's more talented than Hooker, and I think the weapons for Ohio State are more talented than weapons for Tennessee. Now, I am skeptical that Ohio State can defend Georgia, but they just don't have momentum right now. And I know Ohio State's got a couple studs on defense. Georgia's got a few studs on defense. This is essentially a home game for the Dogs. I mean, this is the 3rd time they're playing in Mercedes-Benz Stadium this season. They play there a lot, and they've dominated both games. 49-3 against Oregon, a top 25 team, and 50-30 against the top 20 team in LSU. So I have a hard time seeing Ohio State win this game, and they don't have momentum. Can that affect them? I definitely think that can affect them. Thank you for watching. Make sure you're checking out the links down below. DAWGSTRUCTION, all that. We'll see you at the site dawgpost.com, and I'll hopefully see you in Atlanta for the Peach Bowl.